In about 1980, I decided I was going to do some graduate work at Wheaton College. And at the time, we weren't living far from Wheaton College, and they had a program in the Billy Graham School of Evangelism called Communications. And I got into the program, and one of the assignments that they gave me a year to do was to create a radio program. Now, they didn't give much instructions. They said, you've got to have a radio program. It's got to go for 3 months. They didn't tell me how to finance it. They didn't tell me what kind of radio station or anything. They said, you go out there and figure that out. Well, it was about that time I was at Southeastern Bible College, and I listened to their radio program, and I knew I had a winner. Their radio program was terrible. So I went to the president, and I said, listen, I got an idea of how we can improve our radio ministry. And he said, Jim, I'm too busy to change what I'm doing. He said, it's easy for me to just switch over and preach a sermon. And he says, that's all I'm going to do. He says, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Well, we were living out in the country, and the little church I was preaching at, the little Brethren church, I casually mentioned one Sunday morning, I said, you know, I've only got about 9 months to complete this assignment of a radio program, and I wish you'd pray with me on it. Well, a couple days later, one of the deacons drove up, and out of his coverall, and that's where they carried their billfolds, right in the front, he pulled his billfold out, and he handed me $80. And he says, let's see how far that'll go on your radio program. Well, I never, ever again needed money for that radio program. I went in and I analyzed. There were 2 stations in Oneonta, Alabama. The configuration is that we're in a valley, and none of the stations from Chattanooga or Birmingham could reach into that valley. They weren't clear signals. But these 2 stations were owned by the same company, AM and FM, and so I evaluated their programming, and I saw what they were doing. And then I did a demographic study on the churches in the county. And all of them preached Jesus saved, almost every one of them. This is the Bible Belt, if you remember. And but there was no edification. There was no sanctification. There was no teaching. So I decided I was going to have a little radio program that would teach. And so I designed a little program that was 5 minutes. And I went in, and the guy sold me 5 minutes in between mutual news and what they were serving in the cafeterias. And I figured nobody would, change stations. They couldn't, because there was no other stations in 5 minutes. Well, I named the program Seed Time. And I would always conclude every little 5 minutes by saying, it only takes a moment to plant a seed, but a lifetime to reap the results. And that caught on to the fact that about 3 years later, they ran a full-page newspaper article on, here's the man that always says it only takes a moment to plant a seed, but a lifetime to do the harvest. Well, that went on, and it was immediately I got a sponsor, and it was a funeral home. And he says, I think what you're saying will appeal to, and he says, I've got a new funeral home, and I need to build my business. I said, I'll help you. So I put together 2 commercials for him. And I would come on and I would say, this is Jim Harper with Seed Time, brought to you by King's Funeral Home. I said, do what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. They took the pressure off their family. They went ahead and planned their funeral. The next day I would say, King's Funeral Home, the last folks that let you down. And that took off. And I never changed that. That was the same thing. Repetition is the key to everything. Well, about 3.5 years went by, and I had 2 other people step up to the plate and said, we like a sponsor. So I had plenty of sponsors. About 3.5 years went by, and one day I walked into the radio station. There was the owner, and I said, L.D. Bentley, are you ever going to give me more than 5 minutes? I said, it's impossible for a preacher to say what he wants to say in 5 minutes. He said, how would you like to have 3.5 hours? I said, I got to pray about that. I went outside and said, thank you, Lord, thank you, Lord. And I went back inside, and I said, okay, what do I got to do? He says, on Sunday morning on the FM station, all I do is play Christian music, got a couple of sponsors, and then we break at 10:45, and we go to one of the churches, either the Methodist Church or First Baptist. And I said, okay, what do you want me to do? He says, you do it. He says, you create whatever program you want. So I thought about that for a few days, and I came up with a program called Seed Time Plus. Plus the news, plus the weather, and music. And on the hash mark, right in the middle of each of the 15-minute sections, I put together a theme. And I'd work that theme all the way through every morning. Now, it was easy to find a theme. I just followed Hallmark. Hallmark sold so many cards that all I have to do is say, well, Valentine's this week. Let me tell you where we got Valentine. Let me tell you the Christian Valentine. And I'd talk about that and read some Christian Valentines. Grandparents' Day. Let me tell you why you should, honor your grandparents. Well, that went on. That was easy to do. Now, the other thing about it is that I had Christian music on 7 big reels, and they had tones on it, and I'd put it in the computer, and when I was through talking, a tone would hit. Nobody could hear the tone, only the computer, and here would come the Christian music. Well, I would organize that according to the early birds. I knew that the older people got up early. So there was Tennessee Ernie and the Goodwin Foundation people, and I was playing all their favorites, and everything was fine. By the time 10:30 came, I started with Amy Grant and some of these others, and that worked out fine until one week I got mixed up and put the wrong tapes in, and man, I got criticized all week for that. But then I also had to go in at 6 o'clock in the morning and tape the weather 3 different ways. And I would take off the teletype what the weather was going to be, and I would say, well, let's take a break for the weather this morning. Blount County, it looks like it's going to be about 89 and cloudy, overcast. Maybe this afternoon you can get in a picnic. And I would do that kind of stuff. And I'd switch it up. And then that went real well. It was the most successful in my heart ministry I ever had, and I'm sorry I ended up giving it up. I also involved my 2 boys. I had at that time I had a 15-year-old and I had a 12-year-old. Now my 15-year-old had a good speaking voice, and I'd be out of town a lot for the college, and he would get behind the mic and he would say, well, Jim Harper Jr. can't be here this morning, but this is Jim Harper III, and we've got another Seed Time Plus. And he knew the routine. And I would load the machine before I'd go out of town. I would select what we were doing, and I had files and files of information you could read and go over, and that took care of that. Now, my 12-year-old turned out to be a surprise. Oh, by the way, I got both of these boys licensed with the FAA. And under Reagan's administration, there was no regulations. And so I got them licensed. And my 12-year-old turned out to be my engineer. And to this day, he's an engineer. And I'd bribe him on Sunday morning with Hardy biscuits. And I said, come on, John, we'll go buy Hardee's first and we'll get a box of biscuits. Well, all right. He'd get up and we'd go and I'd get him in there. But he could turn on all the switches. He could run that console. It just came natural to him, and I didn't even know how to turn the lights on. and when it was time to go on the air, he had me on the air. One day, a man came in, he was visiting the owner, and he says, who is that kid over there behind the console? And the owner says, that's the best engineer I've ever had at the radio station, because he was good. He became sharp. Now, my oldest son decided that he had to have a program of his own. And so I bought time by that time it was getting pretty prosperous, and I bought him time on the radio station, and he put together a program called The Circus. And at 2:45 in the afternoon, when the kids are getting out of school, he's playing contemporary Christian music, but he started doing all these crazy things, and that's scavenger hunts. And that's the first person that gets to the station gets a free T-shirt. And he says, Daddy, you got to find me some sponsors. So I went out and found him animal sponsors for the circus. Tiger Paw Tires, the Doghouse Restaurant, Buffalo Rock Soda. And I found all of these things, and they worked. He had a great success. Well, about halfway through all of that, the owner of the radio station said, we got to raise the price. I said, you mean? I said, I got 10 sponsors, and they're doing a great job. I was doing all of the commercials. And he said, no, we got to raise the price. Well, he wanted to double the price. And I went around, and most of them said, okay, we don't mind going $100 instead of $50. I went to two of them, Little Joe's Restaurant, and she said, oh, Brother Harper, I love your program, but I can't put any more money into advertising. I said, well, listen, let's barter a little bit. She said, what do you mean? I said, my family likes to eat out on Sunday. I said, what if I brought them in here for a Sunday meal, that buffet that's so outstanding, and a piece of pie? She said, that's a deal. I said, I will absorb the other $50. And I did. And then I had Payless Shoe Store. And I went to the guy and I said, hey, I got to raise you. Oh, I can't do that. I said, hey, listen, there's 6 feet in my family. What if every 3 weeks one of my family got a pair of shoes? I can do that. So we bartered. And it was a tremendous thing. One day, I had promised my 13-year-old daughter that we were going to learn to drive. And I taught all my kids about 13. We were on a mountain road, and I'd teach them how to drive the truck and all of this. And she was bugging me to death. Daddy, you promised. Well, I said, and then I was caught between a rock and a hard place. I had to go to the radio station and do a new commercial for my Union 76 sponsor, and I had to get it on the air the next morning on Sunday. And here I'd promised my daughter we were going to have a lesson in driving. So I picked up my good Panasonic recorder, and I said, we're going to drive. So we went out and got in the car, and I turned that thing on, and I said, all right, Jennifer, lesson number 1. I'm recording that. And she said, what do I do, Dad? I said, just turn it on. Turn the key on. Well, it was a stick shift. And so sure enough, she let out on the thing, and it just started spinning gravel. And she said, oh. I said, well, just turn it off. She turned it off. And true to form, my old truck went boop, 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 boop. And she said, what's wrong? I said, honey, there's a lot of things wrong, but if I was using Union 76 gas, I don't think I'd have this problem. And I went click. And I went to the radio station, I handed it to the engineer, and I said, put some Union 76 music to this thing. And he did, and that thing took off. We ended up having 8 commercials of her driving, and we never got out of the driveway. It was a hit. The guy took the recordings, and he sent them to Union 76. It really took off. Now, the failure in this whole thing was I bought into a toy company in Atlanta, a Christian toy company. And in order to buy in the Christian toy company, you had to buy a certain amount of the toys. And I figured I'd use that as one of my commercials. And I did. And pretty soon I became more of a toy salesman than a minister. Now, God's grace about that time, the church I had pastored in Illinois asked me to come back and pastor again. But I'm going to tell you, that was an exciting ministry. Oh, by the way, I made an A in the course. So it worked out. Well, this is Jim Harper reporting on one of his memoirs of ministry. And I hope you have appreciated this. Thank you.